I still remember the exact moment I realized I'd been erased from my own success. The champagne was flowing, everyone was celebrating, and my boss stood at the front of the room taking bow after bow for work that had consumed 6 months of my life. 6 months of late nights. 6 months of sacrificed weekends. 6 months of my blood, sweat, and actual tears poured into a proposal that was supposed to change everything for our company. And it did change everything. Just not for me. My name is Emma Clark, and I'm about to tell you how I went from being invisible to unforgettable in the span of one perfectly executed sentence. But before I get to that part, before I tell you about the board meeting that ended a career and started a legend, I need to take you back. Back to the beginning. Back to when I still believed that hard work and talent were enough. Back to when I was naive enough to think that doing the right thing would protect you from the wrong people. If you're enjoying this so far, don't forget to like this video and watch till the end. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you would have done in my position. Because trust me, what I did, it was calculated, it was cold, and it was absolutely necessary. It started on a Tuesday morning in March. I remember because Tuesdays were always the worst. Monday you could ride the weekend energy, Wednesday you could see the weekend approaching, but Tuesday? Tuesday was when you realized you were truly trapped in the grind. I walked into Hartwell Associates at 7:15 a.m., earlier than usual because I wanted to finalize the executive summary before the day's chaos began. Hartwell Associates was a mid-sized consulting firm that specialized in corporate restructuring. We helped failing companies become profitable again, or at least that's what the brochure said. In reality, we helped rich people figure out how to fire enough workers to make their balance sheets look good for the next quarterly report. I'd made peace with the moral ambiguity of it all. I had student loans that didn't care about my conscience. I'd been with the company for 4 years. 4 years of proving myself. 4 years of being the person who stayed late, came in early, and never complained. 4 years of watching less qualified men get promoted while I was told to be patient and wait for the right opportunity. The right opportunity finally came in the form of Meridian Industries. Meridian was a manufacturing giant that was hemorrhaging money after a series of bad investments and worse management decisions. They were looking for a consulting firm to come in, assess the damage, and create a comprehensive turnaround strategy. The contract was worth $3.2 million. For a firm our size, landing Meridian would mean bonuses, expansions, and the kind of prestige that attracted even bigger clients. Every senior consultant in the building wanted to lead the pitch team. I wanted it more than I wanted air. When they announced the opportunity in the monthly all-hands meeting, I felt something ignite in my chest. This was it. This was my chance to prove that I wasn't just good at my job, I was exceptional. This was my chance to move from senior consultant to partner track. This was my chance to finally be seen. My boss, Richard Brennan, was the VP of Client Relations. He was 52 years old, with the kind of carefully maintained appearance that screamed I peaked in my 30s and I'm desperately clinging to it. Silver hair that he dyed to look distinguished rather than gray. Expensive suits that were always just slightly too tight. A smile that never quite reached his eyes. Richard had a reputation. Everyone knew it. He was the guy who took credit. The guy who would throw you under the bus to save himself. The guy who somehow always ended up smelling like roses even when everyone around him was covered in dirt. But he was also charming. Charismatic. The kind of man who could convince you that up was down and that you should thank him for the privilege of being confused. I'd managed to mostly stay out of his direct line of fire during my 4 years at Hartwell. I reported to him technically, but I worked on smaller projects with other team leads. We had a professional relationship. Cordial. Distant. Safe. That was about to change. 2 days after the Meridian opportunity was announced, I submitted my proposal to lead the pitch team. It was 27 pages long, single-spaced, with a detailed methodology, timeline, budget breakdown, and preliminary research on Meridian's specific challenges. I'd spent the previous 48 hours living on coffee and ambition, barely sleeping, because I knew this proposal had to be perfect. It was perfect. 3 days later, Richard called me into his office. His office was on the corner of the 6th floor, with windows that overlooked the city and furniture that cost more than my car. There was a photograph on his desk of him shaking hands with the governor. Another of him at some charity gala with his wife, a woman I'd met exactly once and who'd looked at me like I was furniture. "Emma," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Sit." I sat. He picked up my proposal, which was marked up with yellow highlighter and red pen notes. "This is impressive work." My heart soared. "Thank you. I really think I can, which is why I want you on the team." On the team. Not leading it. On it. I kept my face neutral. Professional. "I appreciate that, Richard, but I submitted to lead the project. I think my proposal demonstrates that I have the vision and capability, and I agree," he interrupted smoothly. "You have tremendous capability, Emma. Which is why you're going to be instrumental in making this pitch successful. But leadership on a project this size requires a certain level of experience. Client-facing experience. Executive-level relationship management. Skills that, frankly, take time to develop. Translation: you're a woman in your early 30s, and I don't trust you not to fuck this up." I didn't say that. What I said was, I've successfully managed 7 major client projects in the last 2 years alone. My client satisfaction ratings are consistently above. I know your track record, Emma. It's excellent. But this is different. This is Meridian. This is $3.2 million and the future reputation of this firm. I need someone with my level of experience at the helm. And there it was. He was going to lead it himself. "However," he continued, and his smile widened, "I need a strong second in command. Someone detail-oriented. Someone who can do the heavy lifting on the analysis and strategy development. That's you. You'll be my right hand on this. You'll have significant input. And when we land this deal, not if, Emma, when, you'll be recognized for your contributions. I'll make sure of it." I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell him that this was bullshit, that I deserved to lead, that my proposal was better than anything he could create. But I also knew how the game was played. You don't win by fighting every battle. You win by choosing the right battles and fighting them strategically. This wasn't the right battle. Not yet. So I smiled. "I appreciate the opportunity, Richard. I won't let you down. I know you won't. That's why I chose you." He hadn't chosen me. I'd volunteered. I'd submitted a proposal. I'd done the work. But in Richard's mind, everything was his choice, his decision, his benevolence. I stood up to leave. "Oh, and Emma," he called after me. "Let's keep the team small on this one. Just you and me on the core strategy. I don't want too many cooks in the kitchen. What we create together will be proprietary. Confidential. Just between us until the pitch. Understood?" Something cold slithered down my spine. Just between us. Confidential. But I nodded. Understood. That was my first mistake. The next 6 months were a blur of spreadsheets, late nights, and slowly disappearing boundaries between my work life and my non-existent personal life. I didn't have time for friends. I didn't have time for dating. I barely had time to sleep. Richard and I met every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 6 p.m. to review progress. These meetings were always in his office, always after most of the staff had gone home, always lasting until 8 or 9 or sometimes 10 at night. I did everything. I conducted the industry analysis, researching Meridian's competitors, market position, and historical performance data. I interviewed former Meridian employees to understand the internal culture and operational inefficiencies. I created financial models showing 3 different restructuring scenarios with projected outcomes for each. I designed the entire strategic framework, the implementation timeline, the risk mitigation protocols. I wrote every single word of that proposal. Richard's contributions were limited to good work, let's adjust the executive summary, and make sure this sounds confident. He was a consultant who didn't consult. A strategist who didn't strategize. A leader who didn't lead. But he was very good at one thing, taking ownership. Our approach here, he'd say during our meetings, pointing at my work. What we've developed, he'd say, as if he'd developed anything. The strategy I'm crafting, he'd say, while I sat there knowing I'd crafted every component. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself that when we won the contract, when the proposal was accepted, my contributions would be obvious. The work spoke for itself. The quality was undeniable. Everyone would know. I was so fucking naive. In late August, we finalized the proposal. It was 137 pages of brilliant, comprehensive, innovative strategy. It was the best work I'd ever done. The best work anyone at Hartwell had ever done, if I'm being honest. Richard printed it out, held it in his hands like it was a newborn baby, and smiled at me. Emma, this is exceptional. When we land Meridian, your career is going to explode. I'm going to make sure everyone knows how valuable you were to this process. Valuable. Not essential. Not the creator. Valuable. Thank you, Richard. I really appreciate, we make a great team, he interrupted. Your analytical skills combined with my strategic vision and client relationship expertise? We're unstoppable. My analytical skills. His strategic vision. His expertise. I swallowed the anger rising in my throat. I'm looking forward to the pitch. September 15th. 2 weeks from now. We're going to walk in there and blow their minds. September 15th arrived with the kind of perfect weather that felt like a cosmic joke. Sunny. 72 degrees. Not a cloud in the sky. The kind of day that makes you believe good things are possible. The Meridian pitch was scheduled for 10 a.m. at their headquarters downtown. Richard and I arrived at 9:30. Both of us carrying leather portfolios and confidence we'd earned very differently. The pitch went flawlessly. We were in a conference room with 12 Meridian executives, including their CEO, CFO, and the entire board of directors. Richard led the presentation, speaking from the slides I'd created, explaining the strategy I'd developed, articulating the vision I'd crafted. He was good at it, I'll give him that. He had stage presence. He had charm. He knew how to read a room and adjust his tone, his energy, his approach. He was performing my symphony, and he was performing it beautifully. I sat beside him, chiming in when asked direct questions, providing the detailed technical explanations when needed, but mostly watching him take everything I'd built and present it as his own. The Meridian executives were impressed. I could see it in their faces. The way they leaned forward. The way they took notes. The way they looked at Richard like he was some kind of consulting messiah who'd descended from heaven to save their failing company. After 90 minutes, we finished. The CEO, a man named Gerald Hutchins with steel-gray hair and a handshake that could crush bones, stood up and smiled. Richard, this is exactly what we've been looking for. Comprehensive. Innovative. Aggressive but realistic. I'm going to be honest with you, we've heard pitches from 4 other firms, and none of them came close to this level of insight. I appreciate that, Gerald, Richard said smoothly. At Hartwell, we don't believe in cookie-cutter solutions. Every client is unique, and Meridian deserves a strategy as exceptional as its legacy. My words. My phrasing. My strategy. We'll be in touch by the end of the week, Gerald said. But between you and me? He winked. Start preparing for a partnership announcement. We shook hands all around. Richard was beaming. I was smiling professionally while imagining what it would feel like to set his car on fire. On the drive back to the office, Richard was euphoric. Did you see their faces? Did you see how engaged they were? Emma, we fucking nailed it. I fucking nailed it. I didn't correct him. What would be the point? 4 days later, we got the call. Meridian had chosen Hartwell. $3.2 million contract. 18-month engagement. It was the biggest deal the firm had landed in 5 years. The celebration was scheduled for the following Monday. A company-wide announcement. Champagne in the conference room. The whole triumphant ritual. I spent the weekend feeling both proud and hollow. Proud because the work was good. Hollow because I knew what was coming. Monday arrived. 2 p.m. Everyone gathered in the main conference room. There must have been 60 people crammed in there, consultants, analysts, support staff, partners. The energy was electric. Landing Meridian meant job security. It meant bonuses. It meant growth. Richard stood at the front of the room, next to our CEO, Martin Hartwell, the firm's founder and the man whose name was on the building. Martin spoke first. I want to thank everyone for their continued dedication to excellence. Today, I'm thrilled to announce that Hartwell Associates has been selected by Meridian Industries to lead their corporate restructuring initiative. This is a landmark achievement for our firm and a testament to the quality of our work and the strength of our team. Applause. Cheers. A few whoops from the younger analysts. Martin continued. This victory wouldn't have been possible without exceptional leadership. Richard Brennan has once again demonstrated why he's one of our most valuable partners. Richard spent the last 6 months developing a proposal that blew away the competition. His strategic vision, his relationship-building skills, his commitment to excellence, this is what sets Hartwell apart. Richard, come up here. Richard walked forward, humble smile in place, hands raised in modest acknowledgement as if to say, "Aw shucks, I'm just doing my job." Martin shook his hand. Tell everyone about the pitch. And Richard did. He told them how he'd identified Meridian as a perfect target client. How he'd spent months researching their business. How he'd personally crafted every element of the strategy. How he'd built relationships with their executive team. How he'd delivered a presentation that sealed the deal. Not once did he mention my name. Not once did he acknowledge my existence. I stood in the back of the room, watching him bask in applause for my work, and I felt something inside me calcify. Something shift. Something break and rearrange into a shape I didn't recognize. People were clapping. Smiling. Congratulating him. A few came over to congratulate me too, asking what was it like working on such a huge project, as if I'd been some kind of assistant. A helper. A supporting character in Richard's heroic journey. I smiled. I thanked them. I played my part. But inside, I was planning. After the celebration died down, after the champagne was drunk and people drifted back to their offices, Richard found me. Emma, great job today. You should feel proud. This is a big win for both of us. Both of us. As if we've contributed equally. As if my 6 months were equivalent to his signature on a proposal I'd written. I am proud, I said. It was good work. The best. Listen, I meant what I said to Martin. When it comes time for year-end reviews and promotions, I'm going to make sure you're recognized. You were instrumental to this. Instrumental. Like a tool. Like an implement. Not the architect. Not the creator. Instrumental. I appreciate that, Richard. We should celebrate properly. Dinner this week? My treat. You've earned it. I wanted to throw my coffee in his face. Instead, I said, that sounds great. Let me check my calendar. He walked away satisfied. Happy. Successful. I went back to my office and closed the door. For 20 minutes, I just sat there, staring at my computer screen, feeling the rage crystallize into something colder and infinitely more dangerous. I could have gone to Martin. I could have gone to HR. I could have written an email laying out my contributions and demanding recognition. But I knew how that story would end. It would be my word against Richard's. Richard, who'd been with the firm for 15 years. Richard, who'd brought in millions in revenue. Richard, who played golf with Martin every Thursday. Even if they believed me, what would they do? A stern talking to? A note in his file? Maybe they'd make him publicly acknowledge my contributions, and I'd become known as the woman who tattled. The woman who couldn't be a team player. The woman who made things awkward. No. If I was going to do this, I needed to be smart. I needed to be strategic. I needed to be absolutely certain that when I struck, there would be no recovery. No redemption arc. No chance for him to spin the narrative. I needed to destroy him so completely that he'd beg for mercy. And I needed documentation. Over the next week, I became a detective investigating my own life. I went through every email I'd ever sent to Richard regarding the Meridian project. Every meeting note. Every draft I'd submitted. Every piece of correspondence that showed the evolution of the proposal from blank document to finished masterpiece. I had hundreds of emails. Time-stamped. Detailed. Indisputable evidence that I had created every component of the strategy, every slide, every word. But emails could be dismissed. Yes, Emma did good work, but I provided the vision. I gave her the direction. She was executing my strategy. I needed something that couldn't be explained away. That's when I remembered the metadata. Every Microsoft Word document contains metadata, information about who created it, when it was created, how long they spent editing it, who made what changes. I'd written the proposal in Word, on my work computer, saving multiple versions as I went. I pulled up the original proposal document. Clicked on File. Properties. Details. Author Emma Clark created, March 18, 2025. Total editing time, 247 hours. Last modified by Emma Clark. Last modified, September 12, 2025. Richard hadn't even opened the document on his computer until September 13, the day before the pitch. His total editing time? 12 minutes. All he'd done was print it. I felt my pulse quicken. This was it. This was undeniable. This was evidence that couldn't be spun or explained away. But I still needed the right moment. The right audience. The right stage. I needed to wait. Waiting was harder than I expected. Every day, I watched Richard accept congratulations. I watched him tell the Meridian story at client dinners, at networking events, at the firm's quarterly meeting. The story evolved each time, becoming more dramatic, more personal, more heroic. In Richard's version, he'd single-handedly saved Meridian from bankruptcy. He'd worked around the clock. He'd made personal sacrifices. He'd risked his reputation on an innovative approach that others thought was too bold. He started giving quotes to industry publications. The key to successful consulting is understanding that every client is a unique puzzle. You can't just apply generic solutions. You have to be willing to invest the time to truly understand their business. That quote ran in Consulting Today magazine with a professional headshot of Richard looking thoughtful and distinguished. I kept all the articles. Added them to my growing file. In October, Richard was invited to speak on a panel at the National Consulting Conference. The topic was breakthrough strategies in corporate restructuring. He asked me to help him prepare his remarks. The audacity was almost admirable. I helped him. I wrote talking points about the Meridian strategy, careful to phrase everything in a way that didn't explicitly claim he'd done the work, but heavily implied it. I watched him practice his speech. I gave him feedback. I played the role of supportive colleague while fantasizing about watching his career implode. "You're incredible, Emma," he told me after a practice session. "I don't say this enough, but you're one of the most valuable people on my team. When I make partner next year, I'm going to push for you to take over some of my responsibilities. Get you more client-facing opportunities." When he made partner. Not if. When. Because landing Meridian had put him on the partner track. Because my work was going to make him richer, more powerful, more untouchable. That means a lot, Richard. I mean it. Loyalty matters to me. You've been loyal, and I don't forget that. Loyalty. He thought this was loyalty. He thought I was a faithful servant grateful for scraps from his table. I smiled. I learned from the best. November arrived with cold rain and gray skies. The kind of weather that makes you want to stay in bed and abandon all responsibility. Meridian's 18-month engagement had officially begun. Richard was spending 2 days a week at their headquarters, overseeing the implementation of the strategy. The strategy I'd created. He was being paid a premium consulting rate. He was building relationships with their executives. He was positioning himself for even bigger opportunities. And I was back at the office, working on smaller projects, watching my career stall while his accelerated. But I was also waiting. Because I knew something Richard didn't know. Something no one at Hartwell knew. In December, the firm's board of directors was scheduled to meet. This was the quarterly board meeting where major decisions were made: partner promotions, strategic direction, resource allocation. Martin had mentioned in a company-wide email that this particular meeting would include presentations from senior leadership about their major achievements over the past year. Richard was scheduled to present about landing Meridian. The board meeting was on December 15th. 9 a.m. In the executive conference room on the 7th floor. Board members included Martin, the founding partners, several outside advisors, and 2 major investors. This was the audience I'd been waiting for. I spent the first 2 weeks of December preparing. Not preparing a presentation, I wasn't invited to present. I was preparing evidence. I created a document that laid out everything: timeline of the Meridian project from March to September, email correspondence showing my research, analysis, and strategy development, multiple draft versions of the proposal with tracked changes, all showing my authorship, metadata from the final proposal document proving I'd created it and spent 247 hours editing while Richard had spent 12 minutes printing, screenshots of Richard's calendar showing he'd attended only 6 of our 30-plus project meetings, comparison between my original proposal to lead the project and Richard's eventual presentation to Meridian, showing 87 identical content. I organized everything into a clean, professional package. 38 pages of undeniable, documented, time-stamped truth. Then I waited. December 14th. The day before the board meeting. I went to Martin's office at 4 p.m., after most people had left for the day. His assistant, Gloria, was packing up her desk. "Emma? Did you need something?" "I need to speak with Martin." "Is he available?" "He's preparing for the board meeting tomorrow." "Can this wait?" "It's about the board meeting. It's urgent." She studied my face, saw something there that made her pause. "Let me check." She knocked on Martin's door, spoke quietly, then gestured me inside. Martin Hartwell was 71 years old, white-haired, with the kind of weathered face that comes from decades of high-stakes decision-making. He'd built Hartwell Associates from a 2-person operation in his living room to a firm with 80 employees and $12 million in annual revenue. He was brilliant, demanding, and generally fair. But he was also a man. A man of a certain generation. A man who'd spent his career in rooms full of other men, making decisions based on relationships and golf handicaps, and who could hold their liquor at client dinners. I didn't know if he'd believe me. "Emma," he said, gesturing to a chair. "Gloria said it's urgent?" I sat. Placed my folder on his desk. "Martin, I need to tell you something about the Meridian project. Something that's going to be difficult to hear." He leaned back in his chair. "I'm listening." "Richard didn't develop the Meridian proposal. I did. Every component of it. The research, the analysis, the strategy, the implementation framework, all of it was my work. Richard's contributions were limited to reviewing what I created and delivering the pitch." Martin's expression didn't change. "That's a serious accusation." "It's a documented fact." I opened the folder and slid the first page toward him. "This is the metadata from the proposal document. As you can see, I created it in March, spent 247 hours editing it, and was the last person to modify it. Richard's interaction with the document was limited to 12 minutes of printing it the day before the pitch." Martin picked up the page. "Read it." His face remained neutral, but I saw his jaw tighten slightly. I continued. "This is email correspondence showing the development of the strategy over 6 months. This is the original proposal I submitted to lead the Meridian pitch, which Richard rejected. This is a comparison showing that my proposal and the final presentation are 87 identical in content and structure." I slid page after page toward him. Evidence stacking up. Truth building like a wall between Richard's version of events and reality. Martin read in silence for 10 minutes. Then he looked up at me. "Why are you telling me this now? Why not when it happened?" "Because I wanted to be absolutely certain before I made an accusation that would impact someone's career. I've spent the last 3 months verifying everything. I'm not here to gossip or complain. I'm here to show you documented evidence that one of your senior partners committed intellectual fraud." That's a strong term. It's an accurate term. He took credit for work he didn't do. He accepted accolades, bonuses, and professional advancement based on my labor. He lied to you, to the firm, to Meridian, and to every industry publication that's interviewed him. And he's scheduled to present to the board tomorrow morning as if he's some kind of strategic genius, when the truth is he couldn't develop a strategy to order lunch. I hadn't meant to let that last part slip, but there it was. The anger I'd been suppressing for 3 months leaking through. Martin was quiet for a long moment. "Emma, I appreciate you bringing this to my attention. I need time to review this evidence thoroughly. The board meeting is tomorrow morning, which is why I'm here today. Richard is going to stand in front of the board and your investors and take credit for my work. Again. And if that happens, if he gets promoted to partner based on this lie, I will go public with this evidence. I will contact every industry publication that interviewed him. I will file a formal complaint with the Professional Consulting Ethics Board. I will make sure everyone knows that Hartwell Associates promotes men who steal from their employees." It was a threat. A clear, unambiguous threat. But it was also a promise. Martin's expression hardened. "That sounds like blackmail, Emma." "It's not blackmail. It's consequences. I did the work. I deserve the recognition. And if this firm won't acknowledge that truth, then I'll find people who will." We stared at each other across his desk. A standoff. A moment where my entire future hung in the balance. Finally, Martin said, "Let me review this evidence tonight. Don't speak to Richard. Don't speak to anyone. Come to my office tomorrow morning at 8:30, before the board meeting. We'll discuss next steps." It wasn't a commitment. It wasn't justice. But it was a crack in the wall. A possibility. Thank you, Martin. I stood to leave. Emma, he called after me. This better be airtight. Because if you're wrong, or if you're exaggerating, or if there's any question about the validity of this evidence, your career at this firm is over. Do you understand? I understand. And it's airtight. I walked out of his office feeling both terrified and exhilarated. I'd lit the fuse. Now I just had to wait for the explosion. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed replaying the conversation with Martin, wondering if I'd made a catastrophic mistake. What if he sided with Richard? What if the documentation wasn't enough? What if I'd just destroyed my own career for nothing? At 3 a.m., I gave up on sleep and made coffee. Sat at my kitchen table reviewing my evidence for the 100th time. Looking for holes. Looking for weak points. Looking for anything Richard could use to wriggle free. There was nothing. It was perfect. Undeniable. Mathematical. But I also knew that truth didn't always win. Not in corporate environments. Not when powerful men were involved. I thought about calling in sick. Avoiding the whole thing. But that would be cowardice, and I'd come too far for cowardice. At 8:15 a.m., I walked into the Hartwell building. The security guard, Marcus, who usually greeted me cheerfully, looked at me strangely. Morning, Emma. Big day, huh? Did he know something? Or was I just paranoid? Every day's a big day, Marcus. I took the elevator to the 7th floor. Walked past the executive offices toward Martin's corner suite. Gloria wasn't at her desk yet. The whole floor felt eerily quiet. I knocked on Martin's door at exactly 8:30. Come in, his voice called. I opened the door and froze. Richard was sitting in one of the chairs facing Martin's desk. He looked up at me, confused. Emma? What are you doing here? Martin gestured to the empty chair beside Richard. Sit down, Emma. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth. This was wrong. This wasn't the plan. Martin wasn't supposed to tell Richard. He wasn't supposed to turn this into some kind of mediated discussion. I sat down slowly, leaving as much space as possible between Richard and me. Martin had my evidence folder open on his desk. He'd clearly been reviewing it with Richard. I spent the last 18 hours investigating Emma's claims, Martin said. I reviewed all the documentation she provided. I also pulled our internal server logs showing who accessed which files and when. I spoke with IT about the metadata analysis. Richard was staring at me now. Not angry. Not defensive. Just confused. Like he genuinely didn't understand what was happening. Martin continued. The evidence is conclusive. Emma created the Meridian proposal. She conducted the research, developed the strategy, and wrote every component of the final presentation. Richard's confusion deepened. Martin, I never said I did it alone. Emma was on my team. She did excellent work. I've always acknowledged, you've never acknowledged her, I interrupted, my voice shaking with suppressed fury. Not once. Not at the celebration. Not in any interview. Not to the board. You've told everyone that you developed the strategy. You. Singular. No team. No collaboration. Just you. That's not, obviously I had support. I pulled out my phone, navigated to the Consulting Today article, and read aloud. The key to successful consulting is understanding that every client is a unique puzzle. You can't just apply generic solutions. You have to be willing to invest the time to truly understand their business. That's you, Richard. Your quote. Your byline. You didn't mention a team. You didn't mention support. You positioned yourself as the sole architect. Richard looked at Martin, bewildered. This is how these interviews work. They want to talk to the leader. They want a singular narrative. I can't stop them from, "You could have corrected them," I said. "You could have said, my team and I developed this strategy instead of, I developed this strategy. You could have mentioned my name once. Just once." Richard's expression finally shifted. The confusion melted away, replaced by something colder. Calculating. He realized the danger he was in. "Emma, I don't know what you think happened, but you're misremembering the dynamic of our collaboration. Yes, you did excellent analytical work. But I provided the strategic vision. I gave you direction. I mentored you through the process. The idea that you created this independently is revisionist. The metadata proves she created it independently," Martin interrupted. "Your involvement was minimal. 12 minutes of document interaction, Richard. 12 minutes out of 247 hours. I don't work in documents," Richard countered smoothly. "I work with people. I work in conversations. Strategy happens in meetings, in discussions, in the high-level thinking that happens before anything gets written down. Emma executed brilliantly, but she executed my vision. It was masterful, honestly. The way he was spinning this. Trying to reframe my work as implementation of his ideas, even though he'd had no ideas beyond let's try to win Meridian." Martin looked at me. "Do you have evidence of these strategy meetings? Notes? Agendas?" "I have notes from every meeting we had," I said. I pulled out another section of my folder. 32 meetings over 6 months. In these notes, you'll see that Richard's contributions were limited to general comments like "make this stronger" or "adjust the tone." There's no record of him providing strategic direction because he never provided strategic direction. Richard laughed. A sharp, bitter sound. "You took meeting notes and now you're using them as evidence? Emma, this is absurd. You're twisting a normal working relationship into some kind of conspiracy because you're upset you didn't get enough credit. He looked at Martin, this is exactly why I didn't recommend her for more senior responsibilities. She doesn't understand how teamwork functions at the executive level." And there it was. The knife slipped so smoothly between my ribs I almost admired the technique. He was reframing my complaint as evidence of my incompetence. My inability to be a team player. My failure to understand how things work in the real world. I felt something inside me snap. "You're lying," I said quietly. "You're lying, and you know you're lying, and you're doing it because you've gotten away with it for your entire career. How many other people, Richard? How many other analysts and consultants have you stolen from? How many other people did the work while you took the credit?" "That's enough," Martin said sharply. "This isn't productive." "What would be productive?" I asked, my voice rising. "Should I just accept that I did 6 months of work that won this firm $3.2 million and made Richard a candidate for partner, while I get a pat on the head and a promise of maybe next time? Should I smile and nod and be grateful for the opportunity to be erased?" "No one is erasing you," Richard said, and his voice had taken on a patronizing edge that made my skin crawl. "You're being dramatic. This is business, Emma. The person who leads the client relationship gets the credit. That's how it's always worked. You're acting like I committed some kind of crime when all I did was follow standard professional protocol." Standard professional protocol is theft? Standard professional protocol is leadership hierarchy. I'm the VP. You're a senior consultant. I led the project. You supported it. That's the structure. That's the reality. I turned to Martin. Is that the reality? Is that how this firm operates? The person with the fancy title gets to steal work from the people who actually do it? Martin's jaw tightened. He looked older suddenly. Tired. Like he was seeing something he'd been avoiding seeing for a long time. Emma, I understand you're upset, I'm not upset. I'm stating facts. Facts that are documented, timestamped, and undeniable. The question is what you're going to do about them. Silence filled the office. The kind of heavy, suffocating silence that precedes irreversible decisions. Finally, Martin said, "The board meeting starts in 20 minutes. Richard, your presentation is cancelled. Emma, you'll present the Meridian project instead. You'll explain your role, you'll present the evidence, and the board will decide how to proceed." Richard stood up abruptly. "You can't be serious. You're going to let a disgruntled employee sabotage." "Sit down, Richard." The command in Martin's voice was absolute. Richard sat. "You will both attend the board meeting. You will both have an opportunity to tell your side. The board will review the evidence and make a determination about what happened and what consequences are appropriate. Until then, neither of you speaks to anyone about this situation. Not to colleagues, not to clients, not to lawyers. Are we clear?" I nodded. Richard said nothing for a moment, then managed a tight, clear. "Good. Go to your offices. I'll see you both in the conference room at 9. We walked out of Martin's office in silence. The hallway stretched before us, empty and fluorescent. Richard turned toward his office without looking at me. I watched him walk away, his shoulders rigid, his stride just a little too fast. I went to my office and closed the door. Sat in my chair. Stared at my computer screen without seeing it. I'd done it. I'd actually done it. In 20 minutes, I was going to stand in front of the board of directors and the firm's major investors and expose Richard Brennan as a fraud. Part of me was terrified. Part of me was exhilarated. All of me was shaking. At 8:55, I gathered my evidence folder and walked toward the executive conference room. The 7th floor was starting to fill with the morning's early arrivals. A few people looked at me curiously. One of the junior analysts, Sophie, waved and called out, "Big board meeting today. Good luck." She had no idea. The executive conference room was intimidating by design. 20-foot ceilings. A table that could seat 30 people. Original artwork on the walls. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. This was where the most important decisions in the firm's history had been made. Today would be no exception. I was the first to arrive. I chose a seat halfway down the table, not too presumptuous, not too timid. I laid my folder in front of me and waited. Martin arrived at 8:58, followed by the board members. There were 9 of them total. I recognized most from company events and photos in the lobby. The founding partners, Gerald, Susan, and Tom. 2 outside advisors, a former Fortune 500 CEO and a business school professor. And 2 major investors, venture capitalists who'd funded the firm's expansion 5 years ago. Richard arrived at 9 exactly. He didn't look at me. Just took a seat at the opposite end of the table. Martin called the meeting to order. "Thank you all for being here. We have an unusual situation to address before we proceed with the regular agenda. It concerns the Meridian Industries project and questions about authorship and credit attribution." I watched the board members exchange glances. Confusion. Concern. This clearly wasn't what they'd expected. Martin gestured to me. "Emma Clark, one of our senior consultants, has brought forward evidence suggesting that she was the primary author of the Meridian proposal, while credit has been predominantly attributed to Richard Brennan. I've reviewed her evidence and found it compelling enough to warrant board review. Emma, please present your case." My mouth was dry. My hands were trembling. But when I spoke, my voice was steady. In March of this year, I submitted a proposal to lead the Meridian Industries pitch team. My proposal was rejected, and Richard Brennan was assigned as the project leader, with me as his second in command. Over the following 6 months, I conducted all research, developed all strategy components, and wrote the complete proposal that ultimately won Meridian's $3.2 million contract. I opened my folder and began distributing copies of my evidence to each board member. What you're seeing here is documentation of my work. Page 1 shows the document metadata proving I created the proposal and spent 247 hours editing it, while Richard's interaction was limited to 12 minutes of printing. Pages 2 through 15 show email correspondence chronicling the development of the strategy. Page 16 is a comparison between my original proposal to lead the project and the final presentation, showing 87 identical content. Pages 17 through 30 show meeting notes from our 32 project meetings, demonstrating Richard's limited strategic input. I watched them read. Watched their expressions shift from confusion to understanding to something that looked like anger. Susan, one of the founding partners, looked up. Emma, you're saying Richard had no involvement in developing this strategy? I'm saying his involvement was limited to reviewing my work and delivering the final pitch. He provided no strategic direction, no original analysis, and no substantive content. But he has taken full credit in company announcements, industry publications, and public presentations. Gerald, another founding partner, turned to Richard. Is this accurate? Richard leaned forward, his expression carefully composed. With respect to Emma, this is a fundamental misunderstanding of how senior-level consulting projects work. As the VP overseeing this engagement, my role wasn't to do the analytical legwork, that's what I have talented consultants like Emma for. My role was to provide strategic vision, client relationship management, and executive-level direction. The fact that Emma did excellent execution work doesn't mean she developed the strategy. She executed my vision. What vision? I asked. Specifically, tell the board what strategic vision you provided that I executed. Richard smiled. Patient. Condescending. Emma, strategy doesn't always happen in documents. It happens in conversations. In the high-level thinking that establishes direction before detailed work begins. I provided that direction. When? In which of our 32 meetings did you provide strategic direction? Because I have notes from every single one, and none of them contain strategic direction from you. Your notes reflect your perspective on what was important to document. They don't capture the full context of our working relationship. Then let's look at the email record, I said. 243 emails between us regarding Meridian. In how many of those emails did you provide strategic direction? Richard's smile tightened. Email isn't where strategy happens, so strategy doesn't happen in documents, doesn't happen in meetings, and doesn't happen in emails. Where exactly does it happen, Richard? In your imagination? In some mystical realm where your genius thoughts manifest without any actual communication or documentation? Several board members shifted uncomfortably. I was being aggressive, I knew. Bordering on disrespectful. But I was also making a point they couldn't ignore. Tom, the third founding partner, spoke up. Richard, looking at this metadata, Emma spent 247 hours on the proposal document. You spent 12 minutes. How do you explain that discrepancy? I don't work in Word documents, Richard said. I work with people. My contribution was in the meetings, the phone calls, the relationship building with Meridian executives. I laid the groundwork that made Emma's analytical work relevant and valuable. What groundwork? I pressed. You had no contact with Meridian executives before the pitch. I have the phone records. The calendar invites. You didn't speak to anyone at Meridian until the day of the presentation. Richard's composure cracked slightly. That's not, I had preliminary conversations, show me. Show the board evidence of these preliminary conversations. He couldn't. Because they didn't exist. One of the investors, a woman named Patricia Chen, spoke for the first time. Her voice was cold. Mr. Brennan, I'm looking at the Consulting Today article from October where you were quoted extensively about the Meridian strategy. You said, and I quote, "I spent 6 months developing an approach that would address Meridian's unique challenges." You didn't say my team or we. You said I. That's journalistic simplification. You also spoke at the National Consulting Conference in November, Patricia continued. I attended your panel. You spent 45 minutes describing how you developed this breakthrough strategy. You never once mentioned Ms. Clark or anyone else on your team. That doesn't sound like simplification. That sounds like intentional misrepresentation. The room was turning. I could feel it. The weight of evidence, the pattern of behavior, the undeniable documentation, it was all accumulating into a picture Richard couldn't talk his way out of. Martin spoke quietly. Richard, I've known you for 15 years. I've trusted you. I've promoted you. I've defended you when others raised concerns. But I can't defend this. The evidence is clear. You took credit for work you didn't do. That's not. Richard's voice was rising now, the smooth control slipping. I led the project. I was responsible for its success. In any organization, the leader gets the credit. That's how it works. You've been in this business for 40 years, Martin. You know that's how it works. The leader gets credit for leadership, Martin said. Not for work they didn't do. There's a difference between being recognized for managing a successful project and claiming you personally developed a strategy you had no hand in creating. Richard stood up abruptly. His face was flushed. This is absurd. I'm being ambushed based on the complaints of one disgruntled employee who doesn't understand professional hierarchy. Emma did good work. I've always said she did good work. But she's not entitled to executive-level recognition for doing her job. She was paid. She was thanked. What more does she want? I want you to tell the truth, I said quietly. Just once. Just admit that I created the strategy, and you took credit for it. I won't admit to something that isn't true. Then you're a liar and a thief. The words hung in the air. Harsh. Final. Unretractable. Richard turned to Martin, then to the board members. Are you going to allow her to speak to me this way? I'm a VP at this firm. I've brought in millions in revenue. I have relationships with half our major clients. And you're going to let a consultant call me a liar in a board meeting because she's upset she didn't get enough attention? Susan spoke, her voice like ice. Mr. Brennan, sit down. I will not sit down, or leave this room and clean out your office. Those are your options. Richard sat. But his expression had transformed from defensive to something darker. Angrier. He was a cornered animal now, and cornered animals were dangerous. The business school professor, a man named Dr. Harold Chin, cleared his throat. I'd like to raise a process question. Ms. Clark, why did you wait 3 months to bring this forward? Why not address it immediately after the Meridian announcement? It was a fair question. One I'd been expecting. 2 reasons, I said. First, I wanted to be absolutely certain I had undeniable evidence before making an accusation that would damage someone's career. I spent 3 months compiling documentation, verifying records, and ensuring everything was airtight. Second, I wanted to see if Richard would correct the record himself. If he would acknowledge my contributions at any point. He didn't. Not once. He doubled down. He gave interviews. He spoke at conferences. He built his entire reputation on my work while actively erasing me from the narrative. So this is retaliation, Richard said. I didn't give you the recognition you felt entitled to, so you're trying to destroy my career. No, I said. This is accountability. You committed intellectual fraud. You stole my work. And now you're facing consequences. Patricia Chen looked at Martin. What's your recommendation, Martin was silent for a long moment. He looked old. Weary. Like the weight of what he was about to say was physically crushing him. I recommend immediate suspension of Richard Brennan pending a full investigation. If the investigation confirms what the preliminary evidence suggests, I recommend termination and removal from partner consideration. Richard shot to his feet again. You're going to destroy my career over this? Over hurt feelings and political correctness? Martin, I've made this firm millions. I've brought in clients. I've built relationships. You're going to throw that away because one woman decided she deserves a trophy for doing her job? Watch your tone, Gerald said sharply. My tone? My tone? I'm being railroaded and you want me to watch my tone? Richard laughed, but there was no humor in it. This is unbelievable. 20 years in this industry. 15 years with this firm. And my career ends because I didn't effusively praise an employee enough times? Your career is ending because you committed fraud, I said. Because you lied. Because you took credit for work you didn't do and built your reputation on that lie. Richard turned to me, and the look in his eyes was pure venom. You self-righteous bitch. You have no idea what you've done. No idea who you're messing with. The room went dead silent. Martin stood up. Richard, you're suspended effective immediately. Security will escort you to your office to collect your personal belongings. You're not to contact any clients, any employees, or anyone associated with this firm until the investigation concludes. Is that clear? Fuck you, Martin. Fuck all of you. Richard grabbed his phone and wallet from the table and stormed toward the door. Before he left, he turned back to me. This isn't over, Emma. Not even close. Then he was gone. The door slammed shut behind him, and the silence that followed was deafening. I realized I was shaking. Actually trembling. The adrenaline that had carried me through the last hour was starting to fade, leaving behind the raw reality of what had just happened. I'd done it. I'd actually done it. Martin spoke first. Emma, thank you for bringing this forward. I apologize that you were put in a position where this was necessary. Susan added, what happened to you was wrong. Completely unacceptable. We'll be conducting a thorough review of project attribution practices firm-wide to ensure this never happens again. Patricia Chen looked at me directly. Ms. Clark, I've been investing in consulting firms for 20 years. What you did today took courage. Real courage. Most people in your position would have accepted the injustice and moved on. You didn't. That tells me something important about your character. I didn't trust myself to speak. I just nodded. The meeting continued for another hour, discussing next steps, investigation procedures, and how to handle communication about Richard's suspension. I was excused after 30 minutes, told to take the rest of the day off, and assured that I would be properly credited for the Meridian work. I walked back to my office in a daze. People were working at their desks, having normal conversations, drinking coffee, completely unaware that the firm's hierarchy had just been detonated on the 7th floor. I packed up my laptop and left the building. Outside, the November air was cold and sharp. The sky was gray. The city moved around me with indifferent momentum. I sat on a bench 3 blocks from the office and just breathed. I'd won. I'd actually won. But winning felt different than I'd imagined. It didn't feel triumphant. It felt exhausting. It felt like I'd survived something violent. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You're going to regret this. Richard. I blocked the number. Another text, different number. Enjoy your victory while it lasts. I blocked that one too. He was unraveling. Good. Over the next 2 weeks, the investigation proceeded quickly. The firm hired an external auditor to review the Meridian project documentation. They interviewed everyone who'd worked with Richard over the past 5 years. They pulled records from other projects he'd led. What they found was a pattern. Richard had been taking credit for other people's work for years. Not just occasionally. Systematically. There were at least 7 other projects where consultants had done the majority of the work while Richard positioned himself as the strategic genius. Some of those consultants still worked at Hartwell. Most had left, quietly, without making noise. One had filed an HR complaint 2 years ago that had been dismissed as interpersonal conflict. The firm's investigation report was 53 pages long. I wasn't supposed to see it, but someone leaked it to me. The conclusions were damning. Richard Brennan engaged in systematic intellectual property theft and fraudulent credit attribution over a period of at least 5 years. His behavior violated professional ethics standards and caused significant harm to junior employees' career development. Recommendation: immediate termination, removal from all leadership positions, and formal apology to affected employees. On December 22, Martin sent a company-wide email. After a thorough investigation, Richard Brennan's employment with Hartwell Associates has been terminated, effective immediately. The investigation revealed serious ethical violations related to project attribution and credit. We are implementing new policies to ensure proper recognition of employee contributions going forward. We apologize to anyone who was harmed by these practices and are committed to rebuilding trust. The email didn't mention my name. It didn't detail the specifics. But everyone knew. Word had spread through the office like wildfire. People had started putting pieces together. The board meeting. Richard's sudden suspension. The investigation. My coworkers' reactions were mixed. Some people congratulated me. Thanked me for having the courage to speak up. Told me stories about their own experiences with Richard taking credit. Others avoided me. Looked at me nervously in the hallway. Worried, probably, that I was some kind of whistleblower who might come for them next. A few were openly hostile. Richard had friends at the firm. Allies. People who benefited from his patronage. They saw me as a traitor. A troublemaker. A woman who'd destroyed a man's career over ego. I didn't care. Not really. On January 15, there was another company-wide meeting. Martin announced several changes. Emma Clark was being promoted to Vice President of Strategic Consulting, effective immediately. I would be taking over Richard's former responsibilities and would be on the partner track for evaluation in June. The Meridian's success would be formally reattributed to acknowledge my role as lead strategist and primary author. The firm was implementing a new project documentation system requiring clear attribution of work at every stage. And Martin was personally apologizing, publicly, formally, for the firm's failure to recognize my contributions initially. The applause was genuine. Long. Some people were crying. I stood at the front of the room, next to Martin, and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Seen. The Meridian engagement proceeded smoothly. I took over as the lead consultant, working directly with their executive team. They were surprised by Richard's sudden departure but seemed unbothered once they learned the truth. Gerald Hutchins, their CEO, told me privately, "We hired Hartwell because of the strategy, not the person presenting it. If you created that strategy, then you're who we want leading this work." The restructuring was successful. By March, Meridian's financials had improved dramatically. They were profitable again. Hiring again. Growing again. And I was the consultant who'd saved them. More clients came. Bigger contracts. More opportunities. In June, I was made partner. At 33 years old, I became one of the youngest partners in Hartwell's history. And the first woman to make partner in the strategic consulting division. The night of my promotion, I had dinner with Martin. He'd asked to speak with me privately. We sat in an upscale restaurant downtown. The kind of place where the menu doesn't have prices and the waiters wear tuxedos. Emma, Martin said after we'd ordered, I need to apologize to you. Formally. Personally. I waited. I failed you. I've been running this firm for 40 years, and I failed to see what was happening right in front of me. Richard was stealing from his employees, and I didn't see it. Or maybe I didn't want to see it. Maybe it was easier to believe that talented men were just talented, rather than asking who they were standing on. You believed me when I showed you the evidence, I said. That matters. It matters, but it's not enough. You shouldn't have needed ironclad evidence to be believed. You shouldn't have had to fight this hard for basic recognition. The fact that you did, that's on me. That's on the culture I allowed to develop here. I took a sip of wine. What are you going to do about it? We're implementing mandatory attribution training. New documentation requirements. And I'm personally reviewing every promotion and project credit from the last 5 years to identify if there are other cases we missed. That's good. But it's not enough. Martin raised an eyebrow. What would be enough? Hire more women. Promote more women. Put women in leadership positions where they can prevent this from happening to the next generation. Create a culture where women don't have to gather 247 hours of evidence to be believed. Agreed. Completely agreed. We finished dinner. Shook hands. I went home feeling like maybe, possibly, I'd changed something bigger than just my own situation. Richard disappeared from the industry. I heard through the grapevine that he'd moved to a different city, taken a job at a smaller firm under an assumed level of seniority. He wasn't a VP anymore. He was just another consultant, with no one to steal from. I thought I'd feel more satisfaction knowing he'd been brought down. Instead, I just felt tired. But I also felt something else. Something I hadn't felt in years. Free. Free from the expectation that I should be grateful for scraps. Free from the belief that being good at my job was enough. Free from the illusion that the system would reward merit without being forced to. I'd learned something important. Nice girls don't get credit. Nice girls get used. But women who fight, women who document, women who refuse to be erased? We changed the game. 2 years later, I was sitting in my corner office, the same corner office that used to be Richard's, when I got an email. The subject line, thank you. The sender, someone named Jessica Roth. I opened it, Ms. Clark, you don't know me, but I used to work at Hartwell Associates. I left 3 years ago after my boss took credit for a project I'd led. I didn't fight it. I just left, quietly, feeling like maybe I wasn't good enough, maybe I'd imagined my own contributions. Then I heard about what you did. About how you fought back. About how you demanded recognition and refused to be silenced. It inspired me to speak up at my new firm when a similar situation started happening. And because of your example, I was believed. I was credited. I was promoted. I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for being brave enough to fight. Thank you for showing the rest of us that we don't have to accept being erased. I read the email 3 times. Then I responded, Jessica, thank you for telling me this. What happened to you was wrong. What happened to me was wrong. But we're changing it. One fight at a time. One voice at a time. Keep speaking up. Keep demanding recognition. And when you can, help the next woman fight her battle. That's how we change the system. I hit send and leaned back in my chair. My career had been built on strategy. On analysis. On careful planning and precise execution. But my greatest victory wasn't strategic. It was personal. It was refusing to disappear. It was demanding to be seen. It was standing in a room full of powerful people and saying, this work is mine. My name. My effort. My brilliance. And you will acknowledge that, or I will burn this place down. I didn't burn it down. I didn't have to. Because the truth, when it's documented, time-stamped, and undeniable, is the most powerful weapon in the world. Richard Brennan thought he could erase me from my own success. He thought he could take my 6 months of work, my 247 hours of labor, my strategic brilliance, and wear it like a costume. He thought no one would notice. No one would care. No one would fight back. He was wrong. The day of that board meeting, when I slid that evidence across the table, when I looked him in the eye and called him a liar and a thief, when I refused to let him spin the narrative one more time, that was the day I took my power back. Not by being nice. Not by being patient. Not by hoping someone would eventually recognize my worth. By fighting. By refusing to be silenced. By being willing to burn bridges if those bridges were built on lies. Some people called me difficult after that. Aggressive. Not a team player. I didn't care. Because I'd learned something crucial. Your reputation for being difficult is less important than your refusal to be diminished. Women are taught to be accommodating. To be pleasant. To not make waves. To accept less than we deserve with grace and gratitude. Fuck that. I made waves. I made a tsunami. And when the water settled, I was still standing, and Richard Brennan was drowning in the consequences of his own actions. That's not revenge. That's justice. That's not cruelty. That's accountability. That's not destroying a man's career. That's revealing what was always true. His career was built on theft, and thieves eventually get caught. 3 years after the board meeting, I was invited to speak at the National Consulting Conference. The same conference where Richard had once stood on stage and talked about his Meridian strategy. I accepted the invitation. The room was packed. 500 consultants from firms across the country. I stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces, and I thought about Emma from 3 years ago. Emma who was scared. Emma who didn't know if fighting back would destroy her career. Emma who had to gather 247 hours of evidence just to be believed. I cleared my throat and began. My name is Emma Clark. I'm a partner at Hartwell Associates. And I'm here to tell you about the time my boss stole my work, took all the credit, and how I made him pay for it. The room went silent. For 6 months, I worked on the most important project of my career. I poured everything into it, my time, my skill, my creativity. When we won the contract, my boss stood in front of our entire company and announced that he had made it happen. Everyone applauded him. No one mentioned my name. I paused, letting that sink in. I could have accepted it. I could have told myself that's just how the industry works. I could have been a good girl, stayed quiet, and hoped that someday, eventually, someone would notice my contributions. But I didn't. Instead, I gathered evidence. I documented every email, every meeting note, every piece of proof that showed the truth. I had created the strategy. I had done the work. And he had stolen the credit. Then I walked into a board meeting and I destroyed his career with one sentence. The room was absolutely still. You could hear people breathing. That sentence was, the metadata proves I created this proposal, and Richard Brennan's only contribution was 12 minutes of printing it. One sentence. Backed by undeniable evidence. And his entire house of cards collapsed. I saw people nodding. Some were taking notes. A few women in the front row had tears in their eyes. I'm not telling you this story to brag. I'm telling you this story because someone in this room needs to hear it. Someone in this room is being erased right now. Someone in this room has done brilliant work and watched someone else take credit. Someone in this room is wondering if they should fight back or if fighting will destroy their career. So here's what I want you to know: document everything. Save every email. Take notes in every meeting. Create a paper trail that is undeniable, timestamped, and comprehensive. Because if you ever need to fight back, you'll need evidence. And if you have evidence, you can win. But more than that, I want you to know this: you deserve recognition for your work. Not someday. Not eventually. Now. If someone is taking credit for your labor, your brilliance, your ideas, that's theft. And theft deserves consequences. Don't wait for someone to give you permission to demand what's yours. Don't wait for the system to fix itself. Fight back. Make noise. Refuse to be erased. Because the only thing more powerful than a man who steals is a woman who refuses to be stolen from. The applause started slowly, then built. People stood up. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. Afterward, dozens of people came up to me. They told me their stories. The projects they'd lost credit for. The bosses who'd erased them. The times they'd stayed silent because they were afraid. And I told them all the same thing: document. Fight. Win. Because that's how change happens. Not quietly. Not politely. Not by hoping powerful people will suddenly develop a conscience. Change happens when enough people refuse to accept injustice. When enough people gather their evidence, walk into the room where decisions are made, and demand accountability. Richard Brennan made one critical mistake. He thought I was powerless. He thought my work could be stolen without consequence. He thought he could erase me and I would just disappear. But I didn't disappear. I documented. I fought. I won. And then I used my platform to make sure the next woman who faces this situation knows she doesn't have to accept it. She doesn't have to be nice. She doesn't have to wait. She can fight back. And she can win. That's the real revenge. Not destroying one man's career. Creating a world where men like him can't build careers on stolen work in the first place. 5 years after the board meeting, Hartwell Associates had transformed. We were 53% women now. 3 of the 5 senior partners were women. Our project attribution system was considered the industry gold standard. Other firms were copying our model. And Richard? I heard he'd left consulting entirely. Went into real estate or insurance or something. It didn't matter. He was gone. Irrelevant. A cautionary tale people told at industry events: remember Richard Brennan? Remember what happened when he got caught? I should have felt more triumphant. Instead, I mostly felt sad. Sad that this fight had been necessary. Sad that I'd had to burn 6 months gathering evidence to prove something that should have been obvious. Sad that there were still women out there fighting the same battle, in different offices, with different Richards. But I also felt determined. Because every time I spoke at a conference, every time I mentored a young consultant, every time I reviewed a project and made sure credit was properly attributed, I was making sure my fight mattered. I was making sure Richard Brennan's fall wasn't just about one man's comeuppance. It was about changing the system that had protected him for so long. On the 5-year anniversary of the board meeting, I got an email from Richard. I almost deleted it without reading. But curiosity won. Emma, I know you'll probably delete this without reading it, but I'm sending it anyway. I've spent the last 5 years thinking about what happened. At first, I was angry. I blamed you for destroying my career. I told myself you were vindictive, that you'd blown things out of proportion, that you'd weaponized political correctness to ruin a good man. But the anger faded, and what was left was the truth: you were right. I did take credit for your work. And not just yours, I'd been doing it for years. I'd convinced myself it was normal, that it was just how the business worked, that leadership meant getting credit for your team's work. I was wrong. What I did was theft. It was unethical. It hurt people who deserved better. I can't undo it. I can't give back the years of recognition I didn't earn or return the promotions I didn't deserve. All I can do is apologize and tell you that you were right to fight back. You should have fought back. And I'm sorry you had to. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that your fight mattered. It changed me. It probably saved me from becoming an even worse version of myself. For whatever it's worth, you were the best consultant I ever worked with. Your Meridian strategy was brilliant. You deserved all the credit, and I'm sorry I stole it from you. Good luck, Emma. I mean that. I read the email 3 times. Then I closed it without responding. Some things don't deserve a response. Some apologies come too late to matter. Some people don't get redemption arcs. But I did save the email. Put it in a folder labeled receipts. Because even 5 years later, even after winning, even after transforming an entire firm's culture, it still felt validating to have him admit the truth. Richard Brennan stole my work. I made him pay for it. And I used that fight to change the system that had protected him. That's not revenge. That's revolution. And it started with one sentence in a board meeting. The metadata proves I created this proposal. One sentence. Backed by 247 hours of work. Supported by months of documentation. Delivered with the kind of cold fury that comes from being erased one too many times. That's how you fight back. Not with anger alone. Not with complaints or tears or hoping someone will save you. You fight back with evidence. With strategy. With the same skills that made you good at your job in the first place. You document. You plan. You strike. And you win. I'm Emma Clark. I'm a partner at Hartwell Associates. I'm a strategist, a consultant, and a woman who refused to disappear. And if you're reading this, if you're in a situation like I was, if someone is stealing your work and erasing your contributions, I want you to know something: you have more power than you think. That feeling in your gut, that rage mixed with helplessness, that voice telling you this isn't fair? That's not weakness. That's clarity. That's your instinct recognizing injustice. Listen to it. But don't let it consume you. Channel it. Direct it. Use it as fuel for the most strategic move of your career. Start today. Right now. Save that email where you proposed the idea. Screenshot that meeting invite showing you led the discussion. Download that document with your name in the metadata. Create a folder, digital, backed up, password protected, and start collecting evidence. Because here's what I learned: in the battle between truth and power, truth only wins if it has evidence. Richard Brennan had power. He had a title. He had relationships. He had 15 years of credibility and a track record of bringing in revenue. But I had evidence. Timestamps. Emails. Metadata. A paper trail that couldn't be explained away or spun into a different narrative. And evidence, when it's comprehensive and undeniable, beats power every single time. The other thing I learned? Timing matters. I didn't confront Richard immediately after he took credit. I waited. I documented. I let him dig himself deeper. I let him give interviews and speak at conferences and build his entire reputation on my stolen work. Because the higher he climbed on my ladder, the further he had to fall. When I finally struck, in that board meeting, in front of the people who mattered most, it wasn't just about one project. It was about a pattern. A career built on theft. And patterns are much harder to defend than single incidents. So if you're gathering evidence right now, if you're watching someone take credit for your work and wondering when to fight back, be patient. Be strategic. Wait for the moment when your evidence is so overwhelming, so comprehensive, so undeniable that there's no defense. No spin. No escape. Then strike with precision. I also want to tell you about the cost. Because fighting back isn't free. After that board meeting, after Richard was fired, after I was promoted, there were consequences I didn't anticipate. Some colleagues stopped talking to me. They were afraid, I think. Afraid I'd come for them next. Afraid that speaking to me meant choosing sides. Afraid that my willingness to destroy a VP's career meant I was dangerous. They weren't entirely wrong. I was dangerous. To people who steal. To people who lie. To people who built their success on other people's labor. But I wasn't dangerous to people who did honest work. I wasn't dangerous to people who gave credit where it was due. I wasn't dangerous to anyone who operated with integrity. Still, the reputation stuck. Difficult. Aggressive. Not a team player. I heard it in whispered conversations. I saw it in the way some people avoided me in the hallway. I felt it when I wasn't invited to certain meetings or social events. And you know what? I didn't care. Because the alternative was being liked by people who were comfortable with injustice. Being popular among colleagues who'd watched me get erased and said nothing. Being part of a culture that protected thieves. I'd rather be difficult and right than pleasant and stolen from. But I won't pretend it didn't hurt. Some days it hurt a lot. Some days I wondered if I'd made a mistake. If the cost of fighting back was too high. If I'd destroyed my own career in my attempt to save it. Those doubts never lasted long. Because every time I walked past my name on the partner directory, every time I signed my name on a proposal I'd actually written, every time I saw a woman at the firm speak up without fear, I knew the fight had been worth it. 3 months after Richard's firing, I was having lunch with Sophie, the junior analyst who'd wished me luck before the board meeting. She was 26, brilliant, and ambitious. Everything I'd been 4 years earlier. "Can I ask you something?" she said, pushing her salad around her plate. "Of course. Do you ever regret it? Exposing Richard? I mean, you won, but it cost you. People talk about you differently now. Some of the guys are scared of you." I smiled. Good. They should be scared. Not of me specifically, but of consequences. For too long, men like Richard operated without consequences. They stole, they lied, they built entire careers on other people's work, and nothing happened to them. If I made some men scared? That means they know the game has changed. That means they know theft doesn't pay anymore. Sophie nodded slowly. "I admire what you did. But I don't know if I'd have the courage to do it." "You know what courage is?" I asked. "Courage isn't not being scared. Courage is being absolutely terrified and doing it anyway because it's right." I was terrified that day. Terrified the board wouldn't believe me. Terrified I'd lose my job. Terrified I'd become unhireable. But I did it anyway because the alternative, living with being erased, watching Richard profit from my work, becoming another silent statistic, that was more terrifying than fighting back. Sophie was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My team lead has been taking credit for my analysis. It's happened 3 times now. I've been telling myself it's not a big deal, that it's just how things work, but it feels wrong," I finished. "Yeah. Then start documenting. Today. Every email. Every contribution. Every piece of work you do. Create your evidence file. And if it continues, if it becomes a pattern, you'll be ready to fight back. What if they don't believe me? Make yourself impossible not to believe. That's what evidence is for." 6 months later, Sophie came to my office. She had a folder in her hands. Her team lead had taken credit for her work on a major client presentation. She documented everything. She was ready to fight. I walked her through the process. How to approach HR. How to present evidence. How to stay calm and factual and undeniable. 2 weeks later, her team lead was demoted. Sophie was promoted to senior analyst and assigned to a different team. "Thank you," she told me afterward, "for showing me that fighting back was possible." "You did the work," I said. "I just showed you the roadmap." And that's the thing about fighting back successfully, it creates a roadmap for others. It shows that resistance is possible. That standing up to power doesn't have to end in defeat. That women don't have to accept injustice as the price of having a career. Every time someone like Sophie fights back and wins, the system shifts a little. The culture changes a little. The expectation that women will stay silent and accept less becomes a little less normalized. That's the real victory. Not just my promotion or Richard's firing or Hartwell's policy changes. The real victory is creating a world where the next generation of women doesn't have to fight as hard because we fought first. 7 years after that board meeting, I was invited to testify before a congressional committee exploring workplace credit theft and gender discrimination in professional services. I sat at a table facing senators and cameras and people taking notes. And I told my story again. But this time, I didn't just tell them what Richard had done to me. I told them about the system that had enabled him. The culture that prioritized relationships over documentation. The assumption that men were strategic thinkers and women were good executors. The informal networks that decided who got credit based on who played golf with whom. I told them about the dozens of women who'd contacted me after my conference speech. Women in consulting, law, finance, tech, academia, women across industries who'd had their work stolen and their contributions erased. I told them about the research showing that women are systematically undercredited for their work, that our ideas are more likely to be attributed to male colleagues, that we have to produce 2.5 times more output to receive the same credit as men. And I told them about the solutions: mandatory documentation systems, blind project reviews, transparent credit attribution, whistleblower protections, and real consequences for theft. One senator, a woman from California, leaned forward. "Ms. Clark, some people might say you destroyed a man's career over a workplace disagreement. How do you respond to that characterization?" I looked directly at her. "Senator, I didn't destroy Richard Brennan's career. He destroyed it himself by building it on theft. All I did was reveal the truth. And yes, the truth destroyed him. But that's not my fault, it's his. If your career can be destroyed by the truth, then your career deserved to be destroyed." The room erupted in applause from the gallery. The senator smiled. "Thank you, Ms. Clark. Your testimony has been invaluable." 6 months later, the Workplace Credit Attribution Act was introduced. It mandated documentation systems for project contributions, created whistleblower protections for employees reporting credit theft, and established penalties for managers who systematically misattributed work. The bill didn't pass that year. Or the next year. But it was introduced again. And again. Each time with more support. More co-sponsors. More momentum. Because that's how change works. Not all at once. Not with one dramatic board meeting or one powerful speech. Change works slowly, incrementally, through thousands of small fights that add up to a movement. My fight with Richard was one small fight. Sophie's fight with her team lead was another. Every woman who's ever documented her work, demanded credit, refused to be erased, those are all small fights. But together? Together we're changing the entire system. 8 years after the board meeting, I was keynoting a women's leadership conference. 5,000 women in the audience. The energy was electric. I told my story, the full story, from Richard's theft to the board meeting to the aftermath. I told them about the cost of fighting back and the greater cost of staying silent. I told them about evidence and strategy and the power of one undeniable sentence. At the end of my speech, during the Q&A, a young woman stood up. She couldn't have been more than 25. Her voice was shaking. "I'm in the exact situation you were in," she said. My boss is taking credit for my work. I've been documenting everything for 6 months. But I'm scared. Scared of losing my job. Scared of being blacklisted. Scared that fighting back will ruin my career before it even starts. How did you get past the fear? The room went quiet. 5,000 women waiting for my answer. I thought about it. Really thought about it. Because I wanted to give her the truth, not platitudes. I didn't get past the fear, I said finally. I'm still scared sometimes. Scared that I'll be defined by this one fight for the rest of my career. Scared that people see me as the woman who destroyed her boss instead of a brilliant strategist who happens to have fought back once. Scared that my willingness to demand justice makes me difficult to work with. I paused. But here's what I realized, being scared isn't the problem. Being paralyzed by fear is the problem. You can be scared and still fight back. You can be terrified and still walk into that meeting with your evidence and demand justice. You can be shaking while you say the words that change everything. The fear doesn't go away. But you get stronger than the fear. And you realize that some things are worth being scared for. Your dignity is worth being scared for. Your work is worth being scared for. Your future is worth being scared for. So if you're scared, good. Be scared. Feel the fear fully. And then fight anyway. Because the alternative, living with injustice, accepting theft, letting someone profit from your brilliance, that should scare you more than fighting back. The young woman was crying now. Thank you, she whispered. 3 months later, I got an email from her. She'd fought back. She'd presented her evidence. Her boss had been fired. She'd been promoted. I was terrified, she wrote. But I was also ready. Thank you for showing me that fear and courage can coexist. I printed that email and hung it in my office. Right next to the Meridian proposal cover page. The one that now had my name on it. Because that's the thing about fighting back, it's never just about you. It's about everyone who comes after you. Everyone who's watching to see if resistance is possible. Everyone who needs to know that standing up to power doesn't have to end in defeat. Richard Brennan thought he could erase me. Instead, I erased him and built something bigger. A reputation for integrity. A career built on truth. A legacy of showing other women that fighting back is possible. And a single sentence that ended a career and started a revolution. The metadata proves I created this proposal. 10 years after that board meeting, I'm still at Hartwell Associates. But it's different now. Better now. I'm the managing partner. The youngest and first woman to hold the position. Under my leadership, we've become the most transparent firm in the industry. Every project has clear documentation of who contributed what. Every proposal includes an attribution page listing all contributors and their specific roles. Every promotion is based on documented work, not relationships or golf handicaps. We're also the most profitable firm in our market segment. Turns out when you give credit to the people who actually do the work, they're motivated to do even better work. When you create a culture where theft has consequences and integrity has rewards, you attract the best talent. Imagine that. Richard's office, my office now, has been completely renovated. I got rid of his expensive furniture and pretentious artwork. Replaced it with collaborative workspace, natural light, and walls covered in achievements from our entire team. On my desk, there's a small brass plaque. It was a gift from the Women in Consulting Association when they gave me their leadership award. It reads, "One sentence can change everything." I look at it every day. A reminder of the moment I stopped accepting injustice and started demanding accountability. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't fought back. If I'd just accepted Richard's theft and moved on. If I'd been a good girl and stayed quiet. I'd probably still be a senior consultant. Underpaid. Underrecognized. Watching less qualified men get promoted while I was told to be patient. I'd probably have left the industry eventually. Burned out and bitter. Another talented woman lost to a system that consumes brilliance and gives back nothing. Instead, I'm here. Leading a firm. Changing an industry. Showing the next generation that resistance is possible and justice is achievable. Was it worth it? The fight? The fear? The cost? Every single day. Every single moment. Because I didn't just save my own career. I changed the trajectory of hundreds of careers. Every woman at Hartwell who works in a fair system now. Every woman in the industry who saw my fight and realized she didn't have to accept theft. Every woman who will enter this profession 10 years from now and will never know how bad it used to be because we fought to make it better. That's worth more than any promotion or partnership or salary increase. That's legacy. And it started with one decision: to document everything. To refuse to disappear. To walk into a board meeting with undeniable evidence and one perfect sentence. Richard Brennan took credit for my work. I made him beg for his job. Actually, I did better than that. I made him lose his job, his reputation, and his ability to ever steal from anyone again. And then I took his job, his office, and his legacy, and I built something better. That's not revenge. That's justice. That's not cruelty. That's consequences. That's not destroying a man. That's revealing who he always was. And that's how you fight back. Not with anger alone. Not with hope that someone will save you. But with evidence, strategy, and the absolute refusal to let anyone erase your brilliance. Document everything. Fight strategically. Win completely. And then use your victory to make sure the next woman doesn't have to fight as hard. That's the revolution. That's the movement. That's how we change the world. One fight at a time. One sentence at a time. One woman refusing to disappear at a time. I'm Emma Clark. I'm the managing partner of Hartwell Associates. I'm a strategist, a leader, and a woman who turned her stolen victory into systemic change. And if you're reading this, if you're in your own fight right now, if you're scared but gathering evidence anyway, I want you to know something: you're not alone. You're not crazy. You're not overreacting. You're recognizing injustice. You're preparing to fight back. You're about to change your life and possibly the lives of everyone who comes after you. Be scared. Feel the fear. And fight anyway. Because you deserve credit for your work. Not someday. Not eventually. Now. And if someone has stolen that credit? Take it back. With evidence. With strategy. With one perfect, undeniable sentence that changes everything. You have more power than you think. Use it.